Good afternoon, everybody. It's Charles Cockerton here, President of the British Benevolent Society. I'm pleased to have Jem Baker, our Executive Director, on the line, and also BBS super member and supporter Karen Beale, down in Trinity House Gallery, Tiburon, which is back open and very much a safe space to visit. We have Karen on the line, who is going to be talking about travelling to England in times of COVID-19. Karen has been travelling to and forth during the last few months and has lots of very practical experience and advice to share with our members. So Karen, I'm delighted to introduce you. And yeah, how's things down there in Tiburon this afternoon?
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, delighted to be here. Tiburon is bright and beautiful, sunny, and lots of fresh air. So I highly encourage people to come in, at least, even if they want to just view the view, come and have a look downtown. It's a pretty light, airy place to be at the moment.
Oh, that sounds nice. And when the sun's shining, there aren't many nicer places in San Francisco and the Bay Area to visit. So it sounds like you've been traveling for essential travel the last few months, back and forth from the UK and California. So it's great to have you on the line to be able to talk about your experiences, because I know it's at the back of everybody's minds over here who are from Britain originally, or any foreign national that's living in California. So just diving right in, Karen, I mean, the first question that sort of pops to my mind is the question, to go or not to go? That's the question.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Well, like many of you, I had been very much hunkered down and hibernating with my family, and really got into a groove of enjoying just being home as much as possible, not going outside and not traveling anywhere, to make sure that we were maximizing our safety. But as time went by, I had a situation that required me to be in England. It was a serious illness in the family, and I had to choose the timing of my first visit over there. And what I realized as I researched into the safest way to go back to England is that we really truly do have to keep the risk in proportion. And it was shocking to me when I actually researched the numbers that actually 99% of people in the whole world don't have the virus. So I had to keep thinking, okay, if this is a choice between being somewhere with someone I love at a time that they need me, and there's only a 1% chance that I'm going to even come across somebody with the virus, even though it's horrendous, somebody with the virus, it's a chance worth taking in my case. So I think, weighing up the risk was really important for me. And then when I looked into the airlines, I was surprised at how much things had changed. So even though I'd been watching the news and knew that it was tough for the airlines, we no longer had the option in the Bay Area of flying with Norwegian and Virgin at all, at least back to the UK. And so I looked at other options like British Airways, United, etc. And the good thing is there were a number of options, but then you have to decide on whether you want to go, where you want to change, because there's nothing direct from the Bay Area, although you do have choices of other airports where you can go direct to the UK. Then you have to decide if you would be comfortable on a flight for that amount of time, because clearly if you're on a flight for the usual 12 hours, you will need to move around, you will need to use the restrooms, you may want to avoid that. So there are things to think about in terms of which airline to use, and I've got some experience on that. Also, food and beverage sounds very strange, but you actually have to think about, if you're flying via a US city, there is no longer an in-flight service with most of the airlines. So you have to pack your lunchbox, your backpack, whatever, of food and drinks to see you through the flight. And then you have to think about safety at the airport and on the flight. So I actually designed what I call an anti-COVID pack, which I now keep in the car and have used on the 2 trips that I've made to the UK. And basically I put in there these handy instant hand sanitizer wipes that are not categorized as liquids, because they're in a little thing that you get on the plane. You can just pull it open. You can buy them here in the Bay Area. I took antibacterial wipes as well, gloves, Tylenol, and then my variety of masks. The reason I mention variety of masks is if you have to up for 12 hours on a flight as well as to and from the airport, you're obviously going to need a variety. And I personally took an N95 mask for times when I was around more people, a surgical mask for most of the flight, and then kind of a fashion mask, which is what I wear day to day here, to and from the airport. And that served me well, actually. I think that was a really good tip that somebody had given to me. Don't just take one mask, you know, take a number and take kind of different types. And then the other thing I realized as I was, you know, preparing is, you know, you can't just you get up on the morning you're going and put the normal clothes on. You have to think about the masks, as I mentioned. And in my case, I didn't want to take, you know, a scarf, a jacket, and the extra things that could potentially, you know, cause me a problem if they were around anybody else. So I took the minimum amount of things to wear, just, you know, jogging bottoms and a top. My glasses, I kept glasses on, not contact lenses, so that I had my eyes protected. And it was quite, let me say, it was quite an adventure, just even getting all that together on top of, you know, the usual things you have to prepare for a flight.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, I mean, it takes some real planning by the sounds of things, and time as well. I mean, I had a question around the airlines. I mean, did you find it difficult to find you've mentioned the airlines which are flying, but are they heavily booked? I would assume not, but was there any difficulty with that side of things?
Yeah, actually, it was quite time consuming because I wanted to find out what my options were, and I understand that the options have changed again. So it's worth doing a bit of research on the, you know, the weekend or week you're going. But essentially, I had another conundrum, which was where for art thou airport, really, because I originally wanted to fly direct. I was quite set on the idea that it was safer to get one flight. So I was going to go down to LA and get a direct flight from there. The British carriers are flying direct from LA. However, when I did some more research and spoke to people I knew at SFO, they encouraged me to change for multiple reasons. And for me, that worked out very well. I was pleased with the minimal amount of contact when I got off one flight onto another in Chicago. That was very easy. And I looked for airlines that had free middle seats. That was really important to me. And not all airlines do. And not all airlines will actually tell you whether they do or not. So that's worth checking. I felt pretty comfortable about being on the flight as long as I wasn't directly next to somebody, because not many people know this, but the HEPA filters are very, very good on an airplane. They do eliminate viruses, including the COVID family of viruses, and work from the top down. So if there are any germs circulating, they push them down as opposed to front or back. So I was a little nervous about, you know, the person in front of me, the person behind me. But as long as you're not in direct contact with them, then the seat and the HEPA filters are going to protect you, even if they did cough or splutter into their mask. It's not going to fly around the plane. So, yeah, the airline is worth researching. I don't want to plug different airlines, but I would just say that there are some quite well documented cases of airlines who got it wrong early on, and I can assure you that having travelled on one of those, they've got it right now because they were so much in the press. And then clearly, if you decide to change in an airport somewhere else in the US, consider what the transit will be from one terminal to another, because I was determined not to get on buses and trains and just to walk. So that was important to me. The other thing that was important to me, I actually have Clear. So for SFO, I could just walk straight through. And I do have, airline privilege cards. So same when I got to Heathrow, I could just walk straight through. I didn't have to spend a long time in lines. There weren't a lot of people on the way, my first trip there. On the way back, there was a lot more people, but everybody was socially distanced. And at Heathrow in particular, they were actually lining up outside the airport on the way back. So that was shocking to me, because I got to Heathrow, I was dropped off by a family member, and I saw this big long line, and I thought, oh dear, people haven't checked in advance, so I went round the line, and it was actually the line to get into Heathrow. So that was a bit of a pain, but the good news was it was outside, everybody was distanced, everybody was masked. So when I arrived at Heathrow the first time, which was 5 weeks ago, no one was masked when I got off the plane. When I came back through Heathrow 2 weeks later, everyone was masked.
That was going to
So
be one of
people
my.
are now masking up at.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, Karen. That was one of my questions. I mean, what's it like, the sort of COVID etiquette or respect people are giving each other on the plane? I mean, you can imagine some people stepping on the plane for the first time, giving the all over wipe down with sanitary wipes, etc. I mean, people are wearing masks throughout the flight, etc. When
Yes.
you're on board.
So I flew. Yeah, I flew via Chicago and then Chicago on. The first time, second time via Washington. And I would say that the internal flight, the first one to Chicago, people were still looking around when people were using antibacterial wipes, including myself. I wiped everything down. I made Naomi Campbell, look good, because I wiped everything down. And I said to the person who was on the other side of me, not the middle seat, but the aisle, are you okay with me doing this? Whether she was or not, I would have done it. And she was fine. She was like, yeah, great. And I said, I'm just going to wipe down the middle seat too. She was fine with that. And then I saw other people doing that. And then I saw some people looking. On the next flight, everybody was either wiping things down or, I had a whole section to myself. I had about 4 or 5 rows to myself. But I could see that people were taking it much more seriously, I think, on an international flight than on a domestic flight. And I still think that's the case, Charles, that people domestically are not taking it as seriously because you've got a mixed view of whether, they need to take quite as many precautions. But people internationally seem to be incredibly respectful of each other. All of the flights were boarding from the back first. So that made it a lot easier. You didn't have to walk alongside people. And then the airline staff were taking very seriously. That's again something that I felt very comfortable about. And they don't disturb you. They just come in, they've got their mask on, they smile, do you want anything? And if you don't, like on the international flight, they are serving food. They just leave you alone and you literally don't see them for the whole flight.
It sounds like boldness be my friend, whether it's on the aeroplane, domestically, internationally, or on the public transport in the airports, Karen.
Absolutely. And it was interesting. I managed on the first flights, there's 4 flights, so there and back, just to use the restrooms once, which was quite an achievement. And I really felt like it was boldness be my friend when I went. Actually, when I got to the restroom, I don't think anybody else had used it at all. But I did take my gloves, and again, I sanitized when I got into there. I kept my mask on the whole time. I have a whole routine about brushing my teeth, putting more focused on my environment than I was on making sure my skin was hydrated and things. So it's totally different experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have images of the recent Alan Partridge sketch on his last series, I think, in the UK. But anyway, I won't go down that route. So what's it like when you actually get back to England, when you first touched down? And how did you treat being back with your family, the journey from the airport back to your family? And what was it like, how people observing things there in terms of social distancing, etc.? And I appreciate that's a changing dynamic right now, day by day.
Yes, it is changing, but to keep on this Shakespeare theme, I thought that if this were played upon a stage now, I could condemn it as improbable fiction, because it really felt like 2 different worlds to me. And I know, coming from the Bay Area, we often feel like we're in a different world to other parts of the world, but truly people were not as aware, I think, on the social distancing and mask side as we are. And again, that could be unique to the Bay Area or parts of California, but no one other than vulnerable people were wearing masks on either of the trips. So I found that really quite disconcerting, because I've got into the habit. I literally now, I'm in a habit of wearing a mask, to the degree that I keep forgetting to put on sunscreen now when I leave the house, because my old routine was sunscreen, so I keep getting sunburned, but wearing a mask. Now, in England, people over a certain age or with conditions were wearing a mask, but not everybody, and not everybody was social distancing. And I found that, again, quite different to what I'm experiencing, at least in my part of the Bay Area. What I think is go on, Charles.
I was just going to say, are there any rules that around when you arrive back there? Did you put yourself into self-isolation, or is it prescribed that you have to be isolated for 14 days? Again, these rules might be changing. What was your experience around that back in the UK?
At the time that I went, there was no quarantine. I'm actually going again on Sunday to the funeral of the person I'd gone to, and they will be going into quarantine. I'm going for 7 days this time. I'm not going for 14 days. People think because it says 14-day quarantine that you have to stay 14 days. You don't. It's however long you're there, you have to quarantine for.
Right.
So, and there's only a number of small reasons that you can leave. So I'm actually staying at a hotel where my immediate family is coming after the funeral, so that I can actually be involved in that, even though we'll all be sat outside and I'll be at a distance. And I will be going to the funeral because that is a permitted activity even in quarantine, but I won't be going anywhere else. Now, my last trip, it was different. You didn't have to go into quarantine, but what I did do is I got off the plane, went straight for a COVID test. And that was really because I was going to somebody who was vulnerable, obviously. And I wanted to make sure that I could actually give them a hug and be with them and be with my family. So I got a COVID test straight from the airport. There was a place in Oxford that was run by the army. It was incredibly efficient, very easy. They did the test for you. And I got the results within 24 hours, which was a really big bonus for me because, the faster I could hug somebody that was seriously ill, the better. So I would recommend if people want to do COVID testing, if they're a UK citizen, it's very easy. You just show your driver's license or your passport and you do it online before you go. You book in before you go. Yeah.
So at the end of getting to the end of the trip, coming back to the Bay Area, what were your observations? Again, we might be slightly repetitive here, but the differences between the UK and the US on coming back, had anything changed in the time that here, for example, with testing or the procedure of re-entering the United States or even leaving Britain beforehand? Had it got stricter, for example, in your last trip?
Yeah, it had got stricter. It definitely got stricter. There are temperatures are taken now at Heathrow. Heathrow, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is Heathrow has now, and that whole area has now become very much more like SFO. Everybody's masked, everybody's social distancing, people are taking temperatures, people are asking you questions. I mean, believe it or not, my first trip over, I didn't even get asked my passport. I've never ever traveled before and not shown my passport. So I think people were a bit disorganized at first, but now it's buttoned down a lot more. And people are there's very many more people traveling. So it's not like it used to be. I'm sure any of you that have to travel now will find it very different from when you used to travel. But in comparison to the first few weeks, it's a lot. The travel has picked up a lot. When you get to the US, you are asked by CDC, you go and have your temperature taken again. You are asked a number of questions and then you're given a form. And I don't know what happens if you fail the questions, because both times I've been put into a form that says, you can carry on. And when you get here, you're not having to, here in the Bay Area at the moment, you're not having to isolate or quarantine. What the CDC advises is that you stay home with your family for 14 days. And I asked them if I could have a COVID test this end, because I do have this art gallery and we were just opening up at the time I came back from my last trip.
Yeah.
So it was important that I knew when I could or couldn't go in public, So we're able to have tests if you are in retail or in an environment where you're working around anybody. You can go and have a free test where I live. And that was easy to do, but the test took 4.5 days to come through the results. So it was a lot less efficient than what I'd had in the UK, amazingly enough.
Yeah. It sounds like you made it there and back successfully, and all your preparation, I think, really sounds like it paid off, Karen. I mean, is there anything you'd have done differently or are doing differently this time round?
No, I think what it did for me, Charles, is it really opened my eyes to the fact that you can do things safely. I think that, and in a way, I'm glad that I've had not the experience, the reasons why I had to travel, but the experience of doing something ordinarily in times of a pandemic, because, you know, we have to. This is going to go on for, you know, you heard the doctor the other week, it's going to go on for a long time. Even if we get the vaccine in the first quarter next year, it'll probably take another year before the whole world is vaccinated, maybe longer. So I feel like now I've got an awareness of how to keep yourself to yourself, and how to protect yourself. You know, I'm doing the very best I can, and that's all that any of us can do. And I did contemplate taking my children, especially because it is a funeral. I think that ordinarily there'd be no doubt, but I'm actually not, because it just introduces two more elements of risk for them and for the family, for everybody. And so I'm actually leaving the children at home, and so I am making a change. And I think, you know, that's something to be aware of. Just how do you mitigate your risk with children, because they're a little bit more of the unknown. But going back to, you know, Shakespeare again, it's travellers never did lie, though fools at home condemn them. Because I had a lot of people say to me, you must be crazy, absolutely crazy travelling. Well, I certainly have no regrets for the purposes in which I travelled, and I would do it all again. And you know, I'm not going to lightly travel for business, not at all. We can all do what we need to do over Zoom and things now. But if it comes down to, you know, a once in a lifetime thing, I think having no regrets is more of a concern than the risk that you're taking, in my case, you know.
Well, we really appreciate your hearing about your experiences and your advice. And obviously you're going back this weekend. It'd be great to I appreciate that's for sad reasons, but it'd be wonderful if we could catch up with you on the other side when you're back in the Bay Area to maybe find out how things, if anything, has changed again in your travel experiences. But on behalf of everybody at the British Benevolent Society, Karen, you know, I really want to thank you. This is really invaluable. And you know, hopefully, if anybody out there has questions, or they have their own experiences to share or tips, please send them in to the website or contact Jen. It'd be great to hear from you. Karen, I really wish you the best on the trip home, and thank you very much again.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Jen. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.